Hello and welcome to Artgasm. I'm your host, Allison Moon. On today's episode, I speak with Baruch Porras Hernandez all about shipping, comics, fandom, and writing. I'm recording this now in beautiful, sunny Los Angeles. I'm sitting at my girlfriend's desk, and I just wanted to send a thank you to everybody who came out to any of my events here in Los Angeles. I taught at the Pleasure Chest, I was at Catalyst Con, which is all about sex education, and I just really had a wonderful time here in LA. I got a couple of interviews done for future podcasts, so stay tuned for really great interviews with some of my favorite creators here in LA. I want to let you know, too, that I still have copies of Girl Sex 101 in color, and something that I've neglected to mention is that I actually do have a limited edition hardcover version of Girl Sex 101 as well. I only ever printed 50 copies of those, and they're numbered by me, they're all signed. Each one of them comes with a limited edition letterpress bookmark, and I do a fun thing that I used to only do during the holidays, but now it's just available on my website, where I have a whole Girl Sex 101 gift pack, and that gift pack includes a toy, a high-end kind of mystery sex toy, and lube, and some other kinds of fun things that I like to throw in the package. So if you're looking for a special gift for a person in your life or for just for yourself, that's a really fun one because you get the limited edition book plus a lot of other fun goodies. So you can look for all of that at girlsex101.com and see if you find something that you like. And with that very short introduction out of the way, allow me to introduce you to Baruch Porras Hernandez. Baruch is one of the least pretentious, literary-minded people that I know. He is incredibly prolific. I feel like, especially in the San Francisco literary scene, he's everywhere. He's incredibly well-known, and he's an amazing writer. And at the same time, his writing is, I think, incredibly accessible, incredibly welcoming, and fun and funny and thought-provoking, and all the things that I think really good writing does. It's the kind of writing that invites you to listen closer as opposed to hold you at a distance. And this is what I love about Baruch as a writer, but also as a man. He's just a really fun person. The conversation we have kind of starts with shipping and speaking about this event that he hosts called Shipwreck, which is in San Francisco. But then we kind of meander onto comics and fandom and writing. It's really fun. One quick thing about this episode, the sound quality is a little spotty. We unfortunately had to record this on a cell phone, so there are some points at which you'll hear like the digitization that happens with a Skype call on cell phone. So I apologize in advance. I still think the conversation is still clear. I think it comes through fine for the most part, and I think it's really still fun. So I hope that you don't mind the sound quality too much. I hope it's not too distracting, and I think it's a lot of fun. And if you enjoy this episode and you enjoy Baruch will be back in a future episode. We recorded another episode that's a deep dive all about the movie Threesome. Like I said with the last deep dive, I let my guests choose what they want to discuss. And so with Michael Schulman in the last episode, he wanted to talk about Call Me By Your Name. And Baruch mentioned the movie Threesome, which I was pretty obsessed with years ago. And I love that as a queer woman, I thought it was amazing. And talking to Baruch, who's a gay man, he found it amazing in kind of many of the similar but also completely different ways. So the best way to find out when that episode's happening is just subscribe. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast subscription service, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, whatever. And then when it releases in the coming months, it'll automatically populate on your preferred podcast listening device, and I'm going to make it super easy on you for that. So yeah, stay tuned. But in the meantime, please enjoy my wonderful conversation with Baruch Porras Hernandez. All right. Hello, Baruch.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being with me today. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So I wanted to talk to you today about, you do a lot of live performances. You're a writer. And one of the shows that I think is so compelling / interesting to me personally is your Shipwreck show.
Yes, Shipwreck. Shipwreck SF. It is my favorite gig. It is something really, really unique that people all over, like on social media, are going like, "This is my favorite San Francisco thing," because it's a very San Francisco thing. It was created here in San Francisco. It is the child of two very close friends of mine, both amazing writers, both San Francisco kind of little local celebrities. Amy Stevenson, who runs events at the legendary Booksmith bookstore in Haight, and Casey Childers, who used to run Write Club SF and has 2 books out himself. They were hanging out one night and they were like, I think they were drinking or something. I don't know the exact story, but they were like drinking and they were like, what's something really dumb and really fun we could do to just drink with people who love literature? And they just came up with, they're like, dude, let's ruin classical books by paying writers to write really nasty and funny erotica based on the characters. And they were like, this is genius. But no, okay, so now they're kind of like, yay, this is great. But when they first came up with the idea, they were like, this is going to be so dumb. This is brilliant. So they
brilliant and dumb.
6 of their friends. They picked I forgot what book they picked. I think maybe it was Brave New World. I wasn't the voice of Shipwreck yet. It was another gentleman. And then about 30 people showed up, and the writers wrote their nasty erotica stories based on the character they were assigned, and the audience loved it. And now we sell out the show almost every month. Some crowds are smaller depending on if there's like a Super Bowl or whatever, or something dumb in sports, but almost every month it gets like oversold. Like there's only like room in the back to stand because it gets so crowded. People totally love this show. So the way it works is they pick a classic or a current hit, and then we get 6 writers. Each of them gets a character, and each of them writes an erotic fan fiction story of that character, and then they sit on stage drinking while I read the stories out loud like a radio play, and the audience really gets into it. It's tons of fun and like a perfect thing for like a first or second date. People actually come up to me like after the show and they go like, this is my boyfriend. I brought him 2 months ago to see if he was cool, and he loved the show, so that's how I knew I could date him. And I just high-five them and go, yeah, that's awesome. And it gets really wild. Sometimes people show up dressed as characters. We did Alice in Wonderland, and we had a bunch of folks show up dressed as Alice in Wonderland. Wow. Sometimes it gets really intense. We did, I think it was Atlas Shrugged.
Oh, wow, yeah.
It was perfect for us because all our writers were like, oh, I've been wanting to make fun of this stupid shit book for like the longest time. But we had like 20 white men show up from the tech industry who are big Ayn Rand fans, and thought we were, because the show kind of confuses people at first if they're not too smart. So a lot of these white men showed up thinking it was a night of celebrating Ayn Rand's work, and then were shocked when we were making fun of her terrible books through dick jokes and vagina jokes, and because it's fan fiction and erotica, and it's supposed to be fun. Once in a while, they'll book a real erotica writer and that hasn't seen the show. A lot of like the folks that are erotica writers see the show, they go, okay, this is what I need to do. But sometimes, they're out of town, so they don't know what it's like. So they write real erotica, and it is really funny to watch 300 people get very uncomfortable as I slowly describe a really intense sex scene.
That's so interesting. So like you encourage more of the funny side of things as opposed to the actually hot. Like you're not trying to arouse people in the audience necessarily.
No, I think we're kind of trying to do both. I think it's better if it's both, because we work with a lot of comedians, and sometimes the comedians shy away from the sex and all they write is joke after joke after joke, and those stories lose. Yeah. It is a competition. We have first, second, and third place winners, and those guys that shy away from the sex always lose, or eventually the audience, they tune out because it's nothing but jokes or puns about, Charlotte Bronte, or puns out, Lord of the Rings or whatever. When the real winners are, you kind of have to be a really good writer to be like a long-term winner of Shipwreck. Maggie Takuta Hall is a local San Francisco writer. She's an author of a children's book as well. And like tradition holds, a writer of a really successful children's book also writes really great smut. So I think she's won like 14 times. But she's so smart that she is able to grab the audience right away through being funny and through great storytelling, turn them on at the same time, also make a comment on the book and the writers, make a political comment that is also funny, and then bring it back to the funny, and then both characters climax. I don't know how she does it. One of her winning pieces, they did Gone with the Wind, and she wrote a sex scene between the main character, Scarlet, of Gone with the Wind, and a Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Whoa.
Because it's where you can write whatever you want, really. And it was so good. People... And it's weird to see an audience get freaked out because you see their faces and they're like, I'm really turned on, but I'm also laughing really hard. This is so weird. We did, oh my God, why am I blanking on these amazing movies that are more famous than I will ever be? Jurassic Park. When the Jurassic Park movie came out, Jurassic Park was also a book before it was a movie.
It was indeed. I remember reading it in middle school.
Isn't that funny? I don't remember it being a book at all.
I was a big Michael Crichton fan growing up, so I think I read all of his more popular novels. Sphere, Congo. Yeah, I was a big fan.
Jeff Goldblum makes an appearance, I think, in all 6 stories because you can't.
Of course he did.
Jurassic Park without Jeff Goldblum. So yeah, there was a lot of dinosaur sex with Jeff Goldblum. I think my favorite story was that Jeff Goldblum from The Fly showed up to Jurassic Park to have a 3-way with Jeff Goldblum from the first Jurassic Park movie and the Jeff Goldblum from Earth Girls Are Easy.
Whoa.
Such a good story and so hot. People were like fanning themselves, and it was hilarious because it was all those 3 characters played by Jeff Goldblum.
The doppelbanger scene. I like it.
Showed up near the end. Anyway, that's what's so great about the show. We give writers so much freedom to be creative and, follow their imaginations. As long as it's consensual, as long as the characters are all of age, and as long as there's no racism and homophobia. We try hard. We try. I mean, all the stories are vetted, and I read them, of course, and Amy and Casey read them before we, go on the show to make sure no one's trying to slip in. And once in a while, we'll miss something, but as I'm reading them, if I catch it, I'll change it.
Well, do you find that, you've obviously done pop literature, but you've also done classic literature. Do you find that certain books lend themselves better to this kind of work than others?
I believe it's depending on the following. We did Stepford Wives, which is a classic now. It came out a long time ago. And I think people just, no one's running around going like, oh, yeah, that's my book. You know what I mean?
Right.
But we did, anytime we do something like Wuthering Heights, there's a lot of emo kids out there who fucking love that book.
Yeah.
And so that show was packed. It just depends on the following, really. We did Jaws, and that one was packed, but not as packed as when we did Jurassic Park. I think it just depends on the following and how much of pop culture has been influenced by, the books. And it's funny how some folks think that book is the world to them, and some folks are like, oh, I never read that book, I skipped it in high school, like me. We just did Jane Eyre. I never got through the first page of that book, and did not know what all the jokes. I read the jokes and I tried to land the jokes as much as I could, but the audience was laughing at stuff that I did not even know what they were talking about. And then it gets into that conversation, that whole a lot of pop culture is very white centered, so a lot of classical books are white centered. So once in a while I have a conversation with them and I'm just like, okay, we gotta do something different. We gotta switch it up a little. So next month it was my idea. There's a comedy troupe called Comedio. They're a group of about 5 or 6 comedians that do nerd comedy. They do podcasts, they do shows, they do all sorts of stuff that's centered around comedy for nerds by nerds.
Nice.
They're all Asians. The only Asian folks, the only person who's not Asian is Wonder Dave, the Midwestern white guy.
you need one.
So they're taking over Shipwreck in March, and they are writing on the book Ready Player One. The movie's coming out. I loved it. I thought it was a beautiful little nerdy book, super fun. So all of the writers are people of color.
Nice.
So once in a while, I put my foot down. I'm like, come on. I can't.
Well, so it's interesting. So like the books themselves are often very white, but I mean, do you find that the people who are touched by those books tend to be like, is it like a bunch of Pride and Prejudice nerds and they're all like white girls? Or do you find that it's easier to find a diverse writing group, even if the books themselves are, British, drawing room?
The audiences are surprisingly diverse. A lot of people automatically assume that if it's in San Francisco, if it's in the Haight, it's going to be super white. But Shipwreck has always had people. I mean, Maggie Takuta Hall is an Asian woman. She's one of the people that has won a lot. From what I remember, I mean, I'm always staring at the audience. So they've always looked pretty diverse to me. But I also, I'm a glass half full type of guy. I have, once in a while, a friend of mine will come and he'll be like, "Oh, there's nothing but white people here." And I'm like, "What about like 20 black people here?" And he's like, "Not enough." And I'm like, "Okay, totally legit." I guess it's
something to aspire to.
San Francisco's getting so white, a good group of people of color to me is so good and it's so great. But I know that a lot of other people of color, that's still not enough for them. So, I mean, we're working on it, I guess. I don't have much control over the audience, but I'm hoping that like as, time goes on and more people hear about the show, it gets a lot more diverse. Everyone has a great time either way. But yeah, it's like my favorite gig. You get a free drink if you come. We have like wine and beer if you pay for a ticket.
Nice.
Everybody drinks whiskey in the back.
So, I mean, what do you think is special about, like, because I've written a number of books and I've done a ton of readings, and I tried to create readings that are a little bit different because I find that doing readings, like, I certainly enjoy reading from my own books and I certainly love selling my books, but the reading entertainment factor is kind of a moving target. I've gone to readings that feel like bad church, and I've also gone to readings that are just jubilant. And like, what do you think are the requirements, maybe other than whiskey or in addition to whiskey, that make a reading a collective experience as opposed to a personal one?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't think this is the whole answer, but it's part of the answer. It's really the reader, really. I've been to so many literary readings where, even I've read the book and I love the book, but the author themselves is not a performer. There's a big difference between a performer and someone who can write a really damn good book. It's rare, but once in a while you get a novelist who not only writes a really good book, but knows how to read it to an audience really well and pick what sections they read. Just like there's a ton of spoken word artists out there who can entertain like a 5,000 person audience, but then you buy their book and you read through it and you're like, okay, I don't really see myself, putting a Tuesday night on my calendar where I'm going to spend all night reading this, because the poetry is exciting to hear, but sometimes it's just not super invigorating when you're reading it. But they're an incredible performance.
There's such different art forms. That's the thing. It's like performance and literature. I think that's one of the reasons why they don't really coexist in a lot of ways, is because, to be able to deliver an experience to 300 people in a hall versus to be able to deliver experience to one person sitting alone in a quiet room. Yeah. I mean, that's a vastly different skill set. So I think it's interesting to think about that, like, how can you deliver? Because the Shipwreck has its own book, right?
It has its own book. It's an anthology of a lot of the winning stories that have won throughout the years.
Do you feel like the reading of them, obviously you're very close to them, but do you feel like reading the stories, quietly to yourself is a similar experience to listening or reading them in a room full of people?
Well, to be honest, I've never actually read through the book. I've read the stories out loud myself, and you can hear the stories on our podcast. Amy and Casey record a podcast. They do some commentary, and then you hear my delicious Mexican voice reading, penis and vagina jokes. But a lot of people have bought the anthology. It's a good, it flies off the shelves. And then I talk to them sometimes, because if you come to the show and you buy a book, I tell the audience that I'll draw a dick in it or a vagina if they'd like, because a couple years ago, a guy asked me to sign his book, and I said, "Oh, none of my writing's in the book. I'm just the voice of Shipwreck." And he said, "Oh, I know, but you're Shipwreck to me, So can you sign
Aw.
my book? And I said, sure. So I signed his book. And I was like, would you like me to do anything else? And he was like, do something special. Or I forgot what he asked. He was really cute. So I was like, I'll do whatever you want. He was like, do something special. So I drew a penis in it. I don't know why, because that whole night, maybe there'd been too many penis jokes. And he thought it was the most amazing thing that he told his friends. And then the month after that, I had like 5 guys asking me to draw dicks in their books, in a book that I'm not even in. So... so as I'm drawing these penises on these books and signing, thank you for coming, I asked him, like, the guy was there again. And I was like, so, like, did you just put this in your bookshelf and, like, you're just never going to see it again? He said, no, I've actually read through it. And I was like, really? And he said, yes, these are really funny. And even when they're not being read by you, he said, of course, I love it when you read them. But they're well written enough that you can get a kick out of them, and some of them are really hot, he said. I was like, cool.
Nice.
Some writers take a lot of liberty and explore some stuff. Some of them get very kinky, some of them get very S&M-y, some of them I don't think we've had any scat in some of them, but there's definitely been pee, a lot of pee in a lot of the stories. It's San Francisco, we get very liberal. It's about the spectacle, I believe. I feel that some literary readings, you show up and it's just so casual and kind of sometimes as an audience member makes me wonder, why am I here if you're going to ignore me and just quietly read from your book? Now, I do have to note there are some writers who aren't performers, but they understand that they have to share something with an audience. There's a writer right now who I'm like deeply in love with her work and her as a person. Ingrid Contreras Rojas is a writer. She works with KQED. I've booked her in a couple of my Donde Está Mi Gente literary nights. She's not a performer, but her writing is top-notch, A-plus writing. And at the readings, she's gotten very still, very quiet, and something about her personality and energy just made the whole room like shut the hell up. Really quiet. And then she started reading her story, and not even like super intense, but something about her voice was like, I'm going to tell you something very important. And everybody was at the edge of their seat. She didn't do that thing I do where I'm like, hey, everybody, look at me. No dance.
Well, that's the thing I think that's so interesting. Is like a performance doesn't have to be bombastic. I mean, it certainly can be. And if you're going to be an MC, it's helpful to bring the energy up in the room. But a really solid performer can be quiet and still have the audience just wrapped with attention. And that I think comes from focus, and it comes from intention, and it comes from a quality of truly having something to say that feels authentic to oneself.
Right.
That authenticity part of what an actor does. You don't have to be the loudest one in the room to draw attention to yourself. So I think that's really cool to hear that person has such a draw, and such a pull for the audience.
Yes, I think she has a book coming out of either, that's a tip of my tongue, either poetry or short stories. It was about the importantness, like how important it was to her. And that's how the audience was able to connect. And I feel like that's what I try to tell a lot of my friends that are writers. A lot of people come up to me and ask me for advice, especially after like poetry readings. I have a lot of novelists especially are like, oh my God, I put my audience to sleep last week. Please help me. And I just tell them, it's not about taking an acting class, because they're like, what should I do, Baruch? Should I take an acting class? You used to be an actor. And I'll say to them, like, you don't really, I mean, you should. Everyone should try it once to take an acting class. They're fun. But if you don't have,
they are fun.
It's really try to remember why you wrote what you're writing in the first place. Whatever that urgency was that made you want to write what you're reading to these people, try to tap into that memory or that trigger or that idea, and how excited you were about it, or if it was important enough for you to write down. Find that energy and make that important enough to tell these folks that are in front of you, and some of them are like, but I don't want to read the meaty parts of my book because I want them to buy it. And I'm like, you don't have to. read half of the meaty part. Don't read the first chapter. Read like half, less is more. Read like a build up to something really good and then stop right there and then walk off stage, tell them how much your book is. And, that's what I tell people. Like, if it's important to you, it should be important to them, and be, and be focused, and also like take them in. Look at the audience in the eye. It might scare the crap out of you or make you nervous, but like, you're there for a reason. Don't hide your face in your book. Don't, also don't go over time. Something I do a lot. I've done that. I've made that mistake and gone over time. But yeah, it's about not just the intention, but like the importance. Like, what is important? Why is it important? And whatever that is, make the audience understand that make them believe that it's important.
Totally. I love I've always said, like, how much time do I have, which is a great question for authors to ask. And then I always try and shoot for like 3 minutes less than that, because I feel like there's a punch. Like, I've been to so many readings where it's like you'll have a person that goes over and over and over, and then people check out even if they're enjoying the story, because they were prepared for something and now you're dragging it out. It's like, it's like you want to give them a taste, of you and what you've got to offer, and then let them opt into the experience in a more more full and lengthy experience. And I find it to be so much better for an audience when you can just kind of get in, get out, and knock them dead in 5 minutes as opposed to 15.
Yes. Yeah, and it's weird. I mean, it's Shipwreck. It's not. They're not my stories either. So like. It's weird. I mean, because I'm a writer myself, so it's a weird feeling when people are like, "That was amazing," and I go, "Thank you. That person wrote it. Go talk to them." Yeah, totally.
Well, so do you read the stories to kind of so that people can't be biased by the writers, because it's a competition, or
I think that's why I'm not really. I mean, they tell me all the time. Amy and Casey are they created the show. They're in charge. They always tell me why things are the way they are, and I kind of sometimes forget, because I'm just like, I just work here. I'm like, where's my whiskey? But I think it's so that because the audience votes for their favorite story, and you're always going to have a popular girl who brings like 20 of their friends, and you don't want that person to win just because they brought 20 friends, even though I think that's I mean, if someone shows up to one of my show with 30 people, I'm like, you won. You did it.
You got people in the door, which is really how you win.
This household brought 2 people. Fuck that guy. 30 people? You get to read for 20 minutes. Because who in their right mind still, I mean, in our age, still has friends that show up to a show like, I mean, maybe you do. You're very popular. Like, I can't meet a queer woman that doesn't, like, isn't super in love with you and your work. But for me, sometimes people book me for shows and they're like, oh, I can't wait till your friends come. I'm like, friends? What friends? They all have kids now. They don't leave their houses.
We're all home doing jigsaw puzzles in bath time. Yeah.
But yeah, so it's that the popular people don't win, and it's the best story that wins. And we ask the writers not to tell their friends which one they wrote. Mm-hmm. Of course, I'm sure people, don't follow that rule all the time, but they try to. A lot of people really believe in Shipwreck and love it, and it's such an escape from, the normal. You go to a show and you're like, okay, I'm going to listen to poetry. All right, this is going to be a music night. This is a very different night, and it's a very, not niche kind of I mean, it has its own niche now, but like, it's not following the norm of other shows you can go see around San Francisco. So I think people feel that's really, really special. So that's why they keep coming back and asking me to draw them penises.
Gosh, the shipping aspect of it is so interesting to me too, because it's not just like funny erotica. You're actually using characters that have been established in the canon. Yeah. And what do you think is special about having characters that already exist that maybe the author themselves didn't come up with, but, belongs to the collective consciousness? Why do you think that adds something to the experience?
I think it taps to that, that urge we all had when we're young and we read these fictional characters and we get so attached to them, whether they're comic books or books, and we get so attached to them, and there's 2 of them that you just wish would end up in real life. because when I was little, I was like, man, if only Superman and Batman could make out. It was something I dreamed for. I yearned for it. And we give, the writers the opportunity to follow through on that, to be like, what if this had happened? Like, what if this character found some time to get it on with this other character? Or what if a lot of the women that write for us will take a character that, because literature can often be a horrible place for women characters. They'll take these ignored characters and give them not just a sex scene, but like an empowering sex scene, a beautiful sex. They'll make two female characters that were kind of nameless in a novel and give them more life. And I feel the audience super responds to that. One of my favorite pieces that one was written by Joe Wadlington, also a very talented writer. He's been in the New Yorker, I think, twice. We did Jaws, and a lot of people don't know that Jaws was a novel. They told me I should read it. I don't have time. I'm like, who has time? They're like, Baruch, we're doing Jaws. You should read Jaws. I know Amy and Casey read every book every month if they haven't already read it. And I'm like, I'm trying to be a comic at the same time. I also have poetry gigs. No. So Joe read the book, and I guess, and she's not in the movie, but in the book, the guy who's the main character of Jaws has a wife character who's just written horribly, like written by basically a misogynist. Like horrible things happen to her. She's just written like a shrill one note. Basically, it's a mess. And he took that character, made her the center of his story, and she completely takes over the storyline and then kills the shark herself.
Awesome.
A harpoon she shoots out of her vagina. It's very like serious, but it's also like. Anyway, I thought it was a great story. So that I think people really appreciate that part of it, Or like, I mean, we did Sherlock Holmes, and who hasn't wanted Sherlock to, get it on with Watson?
Yeah.
It's Watson, right?
It is Watson, yes. And that's the thing that's so interesting because, like, you and I had talked about Poe and Finn and Rey as this like threesome fantasy that a lot of people have from the new Star Wars series. It's like. It feels like shipping is having a moment, right? It's because of maybe the democratization of the internet, and people are able to write things that they don't intend to sell because it's very hard to make money off of characters that you did not invent for copyright reasons. But also, like, I think just queer understanding of things, sexual fluidity, polyamory, all these new kinds of concepts around sexuality that Westerners at least are starting to kind of just start to realize. I'm kind of curious, like, what do you like? Maybe like the question is like the Venn diagram of queerness and shipping, or non-traditional, like non-monogamy or non-heterosexual stories, or even kink stories, like stories that are kind of, as to appropriate a term that we just used, deviant, right? Like, how do you think that there's like, what do you think shipping does for that kind of idea of sexuality?
Well, it gives you so much to work with, I feel. I mean, I'm blanking on what books, but like there's so many books we've done where like I'll be talking with the writers and they go, oh yeah, this character, even though the book was written in like the 1920s, was definitely a bottom. Like, and shipwreck is a way to explore that. We did The Great Gatsby, and everyone that talked about it was like, yeah, the main character was a voyeur because he's just witnessing Gatsby and Daisy or whatever go through this thing, and he's definitely probably a bottom. It's there in the words, and so a lot of the writers explored that in their stories. I mean, at one point they were tying him up. He was begging to get spanked. There's so much that you can go. And I remember reading some books when I was younger and just knowing that like that character was probably into something, but they're written in a certain time where you can explore that. Or maybe, I mean, there's one example of and that has nothing to do with shipwreck, but I read comic books a lot, and I've been reading them since I was 12. There's two X-Men characters in the comic book that have never made it onto the actual X-Men team, but they're side characters in another team called X-Force. One of them is the first Mexican X-Men character that I super identified with. His name is Richter, and he has the mutant power to cause earthquakes. Mexican, long brown hair, loved him. There was another character named Shatterstar. He was from another dimension and a time traveler, blonde, super hot, and fought with swords but could time travel and teleport. So in the 90s, they become best friends, but they become very like broy, bromancy friends. And I remember being like 13 or 12 and going like, these dudes are in love. Just the way they would bicker. They would watch TV together. They would go on these long jogs with these like see-through jogging shorts. And they were, they would fight crime together and fight bad guys because they were in X-Force, and it was the 90s, so they had really huge shoulder pads. And the 90s was like the era of big shoulder pads and long hair for men and way too many muscles the way they were being drawn. But these two characters really cared about each other. And the guy who was writing them at the time was a straight guy. And this wasn't his intention, but he, being a straight guy, subconsciously wrote two very gay characters who eventually they get so close that Richter, the Mexican guy, has to go find out who killed his father. So he has to go to Mexico. And Shatterstar, the guy from another dimension, and the excuse is he's from another dimension, so he doesn't know what boundaries between two men are. He stops him at the airport, and he like hugs him, and he begs him not to go. And Richter, who's a human from Earth, a Mexican human from Earth, written by a heterosexual, is like, dude, you need to calm down. Why? What's wrong with you? And he's like, you can't leave the team. The team needs you, Shatterstar says. And then Richter goes, the team's going to be fine without me, Shatterstar. Oh, calls him Star. That's how close they are. Instead of calling him Shatterstar, the superhero calls his other bro superhero Star. He just goes, Star, you're going to be fine. And then Shatterstar goes like, no, I need you. And there's this, you can Google it. There's a comic book that came out in the early 90s where two straight characters were speaking to each other like this in an airport. And Richter goes, I don't know what to say to that. And then he leaves and he gets in a plane and goes away. And Shatterstar gets depressed. And for years I thought about that moment. And for years, and I knew I wasn't the only one, I was like, if only we lived in a world where they could be gay. So of course then the internet was invented. The nerds came and everyone wrote like, everyone shipped them. Everyone was like, here's my fan fiction romance of Richter and Shatterstar. And there was such an uproar about these two men. Because I wasn't the only one, clearly, that they decided to go back and made them gay, even though the guy who wrote them was not okay with it. He was like, the power of fan fiction. The power of homosexual nerds. The straight guy who wrote them was like, guys, Shatterstar and Richter are not gay. I created them. I wrote them. They're straight. I don't know why you guys think they're gay. And I think Marvel was just like, we really want to sell comic books, and it's 2005. You don't even work with us anymore. We own these characters. We're going to make them gay. And I was like,
they did. They made them gay.
Yes. So Richter comes out of the closet, and which is so important for me as like a gay Mexican who loves comic books. This blew my mind. Sure. That's what made me go back to comics. I had stopped reading them when I got to college. I was like, comics are for babies. So I stopped reading them like an idiot. And him coming out made me go back to the comic book store. And I was like, give me everything with Richter and Shatterstar. So he comes out, and then Shatterstar finds out, and Richter's like, hey, so I'm gay now, and I don't know how to and Shatterstar's like, I'm from another planet and another dimension. Does this mean we can make out now?
So does Star Star doesn't have a concept of sexuality in that way? When you say like he's just like, yeah, okay, I'm from a different dimension, does that mean like he just it doesn't matter whether something is gay or not? He just wants who he wants?
Yes, and that's what they've had the characters say that a lot. Star is also non-monogamous. He said that monogamy never existed in his planet and he doesn't understand it. And I love that they decided to write Richter as a typical Mexican gay boy. He was like, don't you dare look at another man. Which is kind of cliche, but I'm like, how many of us didn't go through that when we started dating boys in the early 2000s? So yeah, they were a couple for a long time. They traveled through dimensions together. I think at one point Richter had a baby with a wolf's bane. Anyway, I just think that's the power of shipping. Like sometimes it can be so powerful. Like people as in a collective can see that in these two characters and want it so bad that like to sell comic books, Marvel decides to make them gay, and it did sell comic books. It even they brought them back in another team called X Factor. They were there for a long time. But then, of course, it works like this everywhere. These two new little twinks came out in the new Avengers. They're so boring. They're so boring. These little one's called Wiccan, and he's like a little Scarlet Witch. He can do magic powers, and he's a little twink. The other one's called Hulking, and he's a little green shape-shifting gay guy with blonde hair, and they're together in a monogamous relationship, and it bores the hell out of me. But they became super popular, and people kind of forgot about Richter and Shatterstar for a while. But they're gonna come back. They're making a comeback. I don't know how. But I'm gonna sacrifice some gay babies or Republicans. I don't know. Work. Gotta come back. I don't know how it's gonna happen.
It's so nice to hear. I mean, like that there are now enough. Well, not enough, but there are now more characters coming out so that we can even be bored by things. And I actually think that's like such a weird privilege. But again, like I think that what you're saying about the shipping too is like when you have a dearth of stories that represent you. Like, you have to invent them, because if you can't get them from mainstream sources, you still, like, that human need for stories that reflect your experience is still so deep and so rich. And I think that, like, when any, again, queer media still, like, when any queer media comes out, or when I was a kid and whenever I could find anything like that, but now same thing with, like, non-monogamous or kink media, there's just this, like, must consume. Like, even if it's completely, like, lesbian films have been incredibly milquetoast for generations, and there would always be like kind of a beautiful golden nugget in just a bunch of kind of mediocrity, but like you'd still watch the hell out of it and you would still cherish it because it was the one, it was the one movie that came out in those 3 years that you could get your hands on, and you'd be like, two girls kissing, I'm there. It doesn't even matter if they can't act and the writing's terrible, like I'm there. Which just, I think it's just, it's sad in a lot of ways, but it also speaks to how important it is for people to feel like they have the right to create their own stories. And I love that there are a lot of amateur writers. They're not professionals. You can't sell this stuff. You can't sell your Harry Potter fanfic, really. Yeah. Unless it's considered a parody or satire, I guess. But you do it because you love it, and you share it because you love it. And that's such an interesting... I feel like shipping is such it ties back to just this very base human need for story, because it's not about, it has to exist outside of capitalism. It has to exist outside of careers, because you can't make money on this stuff. But you still spend hours writing it. Why would you spend hours writing it if you can't sell it?
If shipping were a person, it would have a third eye that can see something past what they're supposed to see. So I feel the shipping eye somehow says something in this heterosexual writer who wrote these two characters not knowing he was writing something so queer. And I feel like that is the same way for, other stuff that we've seen and we've read. Because I'm blanking on them now, probably because I'm a little tired, but there's a lot of stuff in mainstream stories and books in mainstream world pop culture that I've always thought were queer in my mind, or songs that I always was like, no, that was probably, for example, the movie Aliens came out, Sigourney Weaver and that dude are like, oh, are they going to hook up? And then everyone dies and she's a sole survivor. But I know so many gay men that are older than me that were like, when that movie came out, they were like, something about that movie. Something about that movie just felt so queer to me, and I don't know how to put my finger on it. But this is before the internet, so they didn't have all the chat rooms to talk about it, like like beating a dead horse to death. But then years and years later, we find out that the original script, the crew on the ship was all men. Whoever wrote, and they were like, look, it takes place in the future. Being gay is probably okay thousands and thousands of years in the future. So this character is going to flirt with the captain. And at the end, he's going to be the only survivor. And then somewhere along the lines, they're like, what are you doing, buddy? This is the 80s. You can't do that. Make the main character a woman, and it's going to be played by, Sigourney Weaver. So I feel sometimes shipping as a force can see things that weren't supposed to be there, but were supposed to be there.
Yeah.
From the beginning, I feel. And I have friends that feel they have a shipping eye for people of color. Like they'll see a movie and they'll go like, this sounds like it should have been people of color. And then they do the research and then they find out that the script was stolen from a person of color and then made into a movie with an all-white cast. And they've written articles about it, which I'm not going to cite right now because I'm not in front of a computer. But I feel like there's another form of that all-seeing eye.
It's that laser focus, that ability to kind of pick up on the subtlest thing. I mean, again, like there are like when actors come out of the closet and it's like, it's not a big deal, but it kind of is because you have this I think so many of us like watching movies growing up, so many queers, you watch a movie growing up and you're like, I'm feeling drawn to this person. I don't know why. They're playing a straight character in a mainstream movie, but something about them is just a little different and you can't quite pick up on it, but they speak to you in a certain way. And then, 20 years later, they come out of the closet and you're like, called it.
Yes. You call your friend, you're like, yep, $5, bitch.
Totally. It's like, it's so funny to have that experience of picking up on the most subtle things. And I mean, I think the one that I still think, I mean, going back to the Poe Finn thing, it's like the lip bite heard round the world, right? When Oscar Isaac grabs Finn and realizes that Finn is still alive and he grabs him by the shoulders and he shakes him once, but then he has the actor just subtly bites his lip. I don't know if Oscar Isaac just was really like...
makes her nipples hard.
Yeah,
and he's like, you're wearing my jacket. Keep it. You look good with it.
Yes,
and you're like,
exactly.
Yes, it does.
And like,
smells like you probably Poe.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, I believe Oscar Isaac was probably playing that character as queer. But at the same time, like, even if he's not, the fact is, like, people picked up on this beautiful moment. And without the lip bite, maybe it wouldn't have been shipped like it has been now, right? Like, without the jacket bit, it could have just been bros being bros. But instead, there's just this little soupçon of sexuality that is really fun to grab onto and play with in your mind because the possibilities are very sexy.
I mean, I'm still holding out. I'm hoping, for that other movie that's coming up whenever they make it, for there'll be just one queer character. Can we just get one? Like, that'd be nice. One.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and that's the thing with the Dumbledore controversy right now too. It's just like with the new, I can't remember the name of the new Harry Potter world movie with Dumbledore
Beasts or Fantastic Beasts or I don't know.
Yeah, something like that. But it's like the notion that he's not going to be explicitly gay. And a writer that I'm very fond of, Alexandra Aaron, I think she tweeted about this, that like this story is about the rift between a man and the man he loved going to war on opposite sides. And it's kind of, I mean, it has a little bit of Magneto, Professor X kind of quality of this like intense bromance. And then now you're fighting on opposite sides of the war. But like in the books, like, or according to J.K. Rowling, like Dumbledore was explicitly gay. This was explicitly his love. And you're going to battle on the opposite sides of a war and you're not going to be explicit about that romance? Like, how is that even a story you can truly tell as a writer? Like that's... You're missing the heart and soul of that story if you're doing it that way, That angers me a lot, and I really hope it has nothing to do, but maybe it does. There's I probably can't say what article it was, but there were some articles written about the Bush era and how mainstream media and artists, were feeling like they couldn't be as, who knows if it was subconscious or conscious choices, but they were like, well, I'm not going to be able to do this project I was working on because of the world we're living in now. A lot of shows were coming out that were, touching back on old times, making middle America feel more comfortable by having shows set in the 50s, when women had less rights and you could see less people of color for some reason. So I hope that that's not happening now with the
the really sad and pathetic state of affairs in the Capitol. That I hope that's not happening to artists right now. I mean, maybe it is. I mean, maybe because you never know, but that might be affecting movies that are being made. And I feel like had Call Me by Your Name been made like 4 years ago, it would have been completely different, because that book had so much sex in it, and the movie basically looked like two frat boys chasing each other around Italy, trying just yelling out "No homo, bro" through the whole Italian countryside. I was so bored. Oh my Lord. I mean, there was more gay lust in the shack scene in Wet Hot American Summer.
Oh my God, that scene's fantastic. I remember I cheered when that scene came. And I also had a big crush on Michael Ian Black at the time. And so it was just like, oh God, what is happening? It came out of left field. Oh, so good. Yeah.
They're both straight actors. My friend was like, well, you just want to see porn. No, I want to see porn. I want to see actors doing a good job. They're like, well, what about Brokeback Mountain? Blah, blah, blah. They're both straight. And I was like, yeah, but when Heath and Jake look at each other, they want to destroy each other with their penises. That was a really good movie. But anyway.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's true. Like
I still go see it, though, people. Go see Call Me by Your Name. I saw it twice. I think we should support gay storylines, even if they're kind of boring.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked Call Me by Your Name, and because it was such a tender story, and it was a Merchant Ivory story, right? It was all about the desire and the emotion, not so much about the actual fruition of that emotion, I think. But I can certainly understand what you're talking about too. I mean, I remember watching Brokeback Mountain in the theater with all my gay friends and having this moment of like, oh my, he's using spit as lube. Oh my God, like there's butt sex happening really right now.
It's a super unrealistic sex scene, but still, I mean, just the way they look at each other and blah, blah, blah.
The ferocity of that. And it's just like that kind of, I mean, being not afraid of that kind of, the ferocity of sexuality, particularly among gay men. There's this need to believe in the kind of the modern or the mainstream world that like gay men are sweet and dainty, right? As opposed to like intense and rough and sexual and animalistic at times. And it's really hard to see movies that represent that full spectrum of male sexuality, because we kind of want our leading men to be, I don't know, a little bit more gentlemanly, maybe in this current era that we're in. And we kind of see like kind of the neuterness of a lot of male sexuality. I have a whole piece that I'm working on about Marvel Cinematic Universe and the sexuality of men in that, where it's just like it's all cheesecake and no sauce, it's just all beautiful men showing their bodies off, but none of them are getting laid. It's just like, what is, and again, like I understand that from like a perspective of movie making and needing to, like actually get financing and have all ages and all that stuff. But there's just there's a sanitization that we see around these like perfect specimens that aren't actually engaging with their bodies in any way other than fighting,
though, just how in comic book form, X-Men are always better than Avengers because Avengers suck no matter what they do. Comic books, not only are X-Men a lot more sexual, I mean, it's why I started reading them. I mean, they're like, hey, look at Storm. She's taking a shower naked in the rain because she can make rain. Oh, look, Havoc's in a little Speedo because it's so hot in Australia. Not because we want to show off his buns. But in the movies, they also aren't super sexual, but you see them in like semi-successful relationships. I mean, the first movie, Cyclops and Jean were together. They shared a bed, even though they weren't married, in Xavier's house of, indecency, and then later Wolverine is definitely, seen as a ladies' man, and you see him naked a lot. I mean, you see his butt in one of them. I think the X movies are a lot. I mean, they haven't made as much money as the Avengers has, but, football makes a lot of money, but it's not necessarily a good thing. So, So yeah, I totally agree. The Avengers movies are super neutered, even though those characters in the comic books, have sex and have girlfriends, and even though there's a comics code still, the X-Men movies I think have been a lot more, I mean, and Rogue and Iceman date, even though they can't hook up, and I think that's about it, unfortunately. But I think the X-Men show a little bit more of sexuality.
Compare though the Netflix shows, right? So Daredevil, Jessica Jones,
they bang. They bang in that show.
They bang,
I love Jessica Jones.
I love that they bang.
Break bed.
Yeah, and I love that in Jessica Jones, like we have a lot of women on top, right? We have a lot of, and there's a little bit of kink. They talk about their powers a little bit. Like it's just that is again compelling to me. And the shows are more violent and they're designed for an adult audience, which is why I think they're allowed to have that. And of course, you couldn't do a Jessica Jones show where sexuality is not talked about because of her experience with sexual assault. And so it's like, I think it's so great to be able, because of course, as an adult and even as a teenager, I would be reading these comic books. And I'm like, God, sex with Daredevil. He's got all these extra senses. He can hear my heartbeat. Like, how can you not eroticize that? Right. And like in the comic books, he's a playboy. He has a lot of girlfriends. There's a lot of sex in that. And same thing with Jessica Jones, and Jessica and Luke are married and have a child. And there's a lot of sex in the comic books there too. And also the shows. And I love that you see that more. I mean, there's cunnilingus in Jessica Jones. Like, I love that. Like, that's so thrilling to me. And I feel like I want more of that because, again, like, we're going to invent those stories in our heads anyway. I would really love a team of professional writers and directors and actors who are really good at their jobs to flesh out these characters so that sexuality is just another part of who they are as human beings. So that to me is like, that's what makes a great story, is not treating sex as though it's something other and it's something that it happens off screen. You know, like I want to see your relationships with people. I want to see the tension that you have with your ex or with your current, or, navigating your secret identity. Like all of that stuff is really compelling, and you can't separate sex and dating from those things and still tell, I think, a complete story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also hope that it doesn't fall into the norm when people do start making superhero movies with actual sex in it. I hope it doesn't, because we did such stupid things with the Avengers movie came out, and yes, it was successful, but they picked like such standard Avengers, and then the most boring female Avenger of all time. The Wasp was a founding member of the Avengers. The woman turns into a tiny version of herself with wings and can shoot people with lasers. But no, let's have a freaking redheaded Russian with boobs. She-Hulk is a member of the Avengers. She-Hulk can juggle tanks. Is also a lawyer. No, let's have Scarlett Johansson with a red wig. Nah. Scarlet Witch. Okay, so she made it into the second movie, but instead of making her like a powerful, dangerous, mysterious, kind of crazy brunette, they made her this like emo girl from the 90s. I just was so mad. So mad with the first movie. Also, for the longest time, the Avengers was led by a black woman who was named Captain Marvel at the time, who could turn into light. They could have done such new and wonderful things with that first movie. Yes, I enjoyed it. Yes, I went to go see it. But like, I feel we got to stop walking backwards. Like we got to, that could have been such a great, such a great thing. I mean, the Avengers, I don't think have had any out gay characters in them. As always, the X-Men are better than them. So the X-Men had their first gay character back in the 90s with North Star, who is a Canadian. And then later the other characters came out. And now I really want people to all go out and buy Iceman. Iceman, the original member, who's been a member since the 1960s. He finally came out after years and decades of everyone, even straight people, going, Iceman is probably gay. Finally, Marvel went, okay. So they let him come out. He came out in such a dumb way. It was poorly written, but we're happy it happened. And now he has his own comic book, not called X-Men. It's called Iceman, in which he's exploring his adult life as someone who came out later in life and is still a superhero. Awesome. Being written by Sina Grace, who is awesome. And I think people should go and buy it. I'm enjoying it a lot. And Richter makes a guest appearance. So that, that gets my vote.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for recommending that. I will definitely check it out. So I think we need to wrap it up. I would love to have you back on and talk more about comic books, because I'm realizing what a fountain and font of information you are here. So we should definitely talk again about queer representation in comics. But this was such a fun conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Real quick, if people want to find you, where can they find you on the interwebs?
Well, if they Google Baruch Porras Hernandez, I'm the only one on there. I have a site. I think it's like baruchporrashernandez.wordpress.com. I'm also on Instagram. My Instagram page is really fun. I post a lot of superhero drawings that I do sometimes. Sometimes I just draw dicks. Sometimes it's just pictures of me at a comedy show or at a poetry show. I'm also on Facebook. And I think that's about it.
So if people are in San Francisco, they should see Shipwreck. That's a once-a-month show?
Shipwreck is every first Thursday of the month at Booksmith, the bookstore on Haight. It's at 7 o'clock. Tickets are only they're cheap. I think they're only like $15. And we give you free booze to listen to porn read aloud by me. Well,
thank you so much for talking with me, Baruch. I look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Yay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
And that is it for this week's episode of Artgasm. As always, thank you so much for listening. A special thanks to all of my new Patreon subscribers, and thanks to all the people who subscribe. Again, please remember to subscribe on your favorite podcast device. Please leave a review. Reviews help so much. It's very hard for new podcasts to get noticed these days, and this is where your contributions to that really, really make a difference. If you enjoy what you hear here, if you have a friend that you think would enjoy the conversation, please share the link, spread the word, tweet about us, put us on your Instagram, all the things. It all really does add up to a good, robust, fun listenership, so that I don't feel like I'm just screaming into the void. But yeah, leave a review, subscribe. If you are curious about our Patreon, please go to patreon.com/artgasm. At that Patreon, you'll get access to special patron-only episodes where I discuss in depth specific works of art or things that I find particularly interesting. I'm going to start to leave reviews soon for different new things that are coming out, and you get special early access to each one of my episodes. You get it a couple days before it drops to the general public. And because we're only doing episodes every 2 weeks, I know that a lot of my patrons really appreciate being able to get the new stuff before it even comes out, because it makes it feel like there's a little bit more content coming at you, and I want to be able to deliver that for you. And also, we will have a future episode where we go more in depth about shipping. I like to think of myself as fairly knowledgeable about a bunch of different art forms, but you may have noticed in my interview with Baruch that I don't know a whole lot about shipping. And I found these two awesome women at the Catalyst Con that I was at just a couple days ago, who run a whole con about shipping for fanfic writers and readers, aficionadas and aficionados. It was a great conversation, and I asked a lot of naive questions, and they were incredibly patient with me to allow me to just ask what's the difference between shipping and slashing and all the things that I just don't know about. So again, best way to find out when that episode's dropping is to subscribe, and you'll get it automatically delivered into your inbox. So in the meantime, again, thank you for listening, and I will talk to you on the next episode. Bye-bye.